Okay, first things first. I've been informed that some of you looked at Cormac McCarthy's Sunset Limited.
We all got together and watched it on Sunday night.
Okay, what'd you think?
It was incredible. It really was great. Yeah, we stayed for like, what, 30 minutes in my room afterwards. Socks talking about it.
We only left because we had to sleep.
Yeah.
It's a really amazing piece, and the acting is superb. I mean, these guys play off each other real well.
And like you told us the ending like before we saw it, but it didn't make it any less troubling.
Yeah.
I don't remember him saying that.
The line, oh God, why did you?
There we go.
Yeah, it's a deeply disturbing play. If you wanted me to save him, why didn't you give me the words?
Is that okay?
And that's how it ends. And, nobody understands evil. And here's the deal. I was talking about this in my last class, but the problem with the human condition is that, at least in my view, is that it's like a Venn diagram with what's rational and what's good, and they don't perfectly overlap. Think of the murder of Astyanax. You can reason your way into murdering a child, or 100,000
Or
children.
meeting the Sunset Limited.
There we go, right. All right. That's why Augustine has made such an important contribution. The idea that reason isn't enough. But as Kierkegaard implicitly points out, that could easily lead to craziness. Okay. The problem is once you open that door, God knows what's coming through it. That's the way. And it's a sensible word.
I realized the next day as I was thinking about the movie that both of those individuals were like their respective cities, that Athens has destroyed itself and Jerusalem doesn't know how to save it.
And love needs reason
Yeah,
for proper deployment.
both of them were incomplete men.
Yes.
He didn't. Mr. White didn't have the words, and Mr. Black did have the words, but he didn't know what to do with them.
Yeah. Well, again, we can't completely separate reason and love, but the problem is it doesn't perfectly overlap, and the results of that can be very, very worrisome. Wait until, I won't spoil the term, but wait until we get a chance to read at the end of the term, Blood Meridian. Yeah, have you read this already?
I went into, like, after we watched the movie, I went on a Cormac McCarthy kick and just started reading, like, everything.
Oh,
Yeah, he has an interesting essay with the Santa Fe Project about the Ouroboros of the benzene ring, and he's reflecting on, like, it was fascinating.
Oh, he's a really smart guy, yeah.
But one of the things that I liked about it, and I think this is reflected in all of his work, is how he puts these sort of eternal debates into the American context.
Yes.
So in this one, you've got presumably the son of slaves, a black man from Louisiana, talking with this educated New Yorker, sort of like the product of an elite education, elite institutions, and it was really interesting to sort of see that like interplay too, like the soul food both as the good things of the world, but also as literally like soul food, from like gumbo or something like that. So I love the sort of like the interplay of race and class. Within the larger eternal debate.
It's many of the themes that we see in Dostoevsky put into an American context.
Yeah.
I mean, there are many similarities, and you'll see that more when we do Blood Meridian. But if you can imagine overlapping Blood Meridian, overlapping the Iliad with Moby Dick, with Crime and Punishment.
Oh dear Lord.
Yeah, okay.
And at the end, when Tommy Lee Jones's character has like essentially kind of won the argument, or he's left Samuel Jackson speechless or whatever. I can't remember who it was, but someone related that to the story of the Grand Inquisitor, where he couldn't answer him with reason.
He kept on trying to find words, and words weren't what he needed. The
Yeah.
closest moment that he came to saving him was with the soul food.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't capitalize it on it because he thought that words was the way he could win him back.
what do you want the guy to do? I mean, you know, he's a janitor. He's not a professional speaker. You know.
Damn smart for a janitor.
But, well, I mean, Cormac McCarthy takes care of his own, but he's interested in the problem of evil and our inability to solve it, and even the difficulties in formulating it. Yeah, I think it's I think he'll still be read in 100 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Okay, they haven't made a movie of Blood Meridian for a reason. No, it's been tried. They've actually got
Multiple
the
times.
rights to it.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's a whole song.
Yeah.
you can't make this nightmarish enough. In other words, it's also like a tour through Dante's Inferno, except you're not going towards heaven. I mean, it's terrifying. That's why I concluded it still will mess with you. Also, it's important that we finish up the Western tradition with somebody that's alive. It's very important not to give the students the sense that everybody you can think is dead. And, you know, that's why I like to finish with one or two living authors. But that being said, Aldous Huxley is not alive, but he messes with our mind. All right. What do you think?
Brilliant.
It is brilliant. Brilliant tour de force. Yeah.
I think towards the end of the book, I'll just bring it out now, was this line just hit me and I was like, wow, how do you answer that? On page, we all have the same copy basically, so on page 228, I thought this is the biggest page in the whole book when Mustafa Mond is explaining things to all three of them, and he says, towards the bottom, he says, what's the point of truth or beauty or knowledge when the Athrox bombs are popping all around you? And I was like, wow. And then he
That's Hobbes's point.
yeah.
And he's not wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You want peace, we'll give you peace. You want consumer goods, we'll give you consumer goods. You want not to be oppressed by the police, we can have that done by our mind control apparatus. So you don't need a silver people here.
Yeah.
All right? We don't have cops. Why? Because everybody's been hypnotized through hypnopedia, sleep teaching, and everybody accepts their status as natural. Yeah.
In Dr. Coleman's class, we're talking about how the society's view of nature has changed throughout the course of history, specifically through the scientific revolution. And one of the quotes in the beginning of this book that I thought was interesting was when he's explaining how the babies are produced or whatever.
Mhm.
And he says that what man has joined, nature is powerless to put asunder. And so, like, it's
what God is joined, let no man
Yeah.
asunder.
Okay, hold on for a second. This is worth thinking about. My view, and I could be wrong, but I think that it's almost certain by the end of the century, give us another 80 years, exo-reproduction is going to be a thing. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And it's going to lead to all kinds of interesting situations and interesting new problems, because morality is not just a set of rules, it's also a living tradition that you have to figure out, you know, your way under new circumstances. Remember that much of human history has amounted to outsourcing things that go on inside your body. I'll give you an example. Cooking is outsourcing digestion, starting digestion actually before you eat. It breaks down the food and actually allows you to spend much less time and energy digesting because it's already pre-digested. It also turns out that we don't have cellulase in our gut, which means we can't eat grass like cows and horses can. But we can outsource digestion to them, have them digest the grass for us, and then put it into these packages of meat that actually move around, which is a great idea. So pastoralism, developing domesticated animals, is the outsourcing of digestion. Computers, calculators, abacuses is the outsourcing of thinking. All right? I mean, it would take you a long time to do calculations that your computer knocks out quickly. So what we've been doing is outsourcing from the body different capacities. Now, I think that the chances in the next 80 years of essentially outsourcing the carrying of children to vessels, artificial wombs, I think that's really likely. I mean, people will still have sex, but my guess is that people can afford it in 80 years will actually go to the scientist, to the lab. They'll donate the sperm and egg, but they'll tinker with it, and then they'll give you something that women don't have to carry. I think that's a virtual certainty. Now, again, before you get off, exactly why is that evil?
Right.
I mean, you got to explain it.
Yeah, that's the hardest part.
It's a complicated problem. You see what I'm saying? Ethics is more than a set of rules. All right. So simply conscientiously obeying rules is not sufficient because we all kind of have new problems coming up. All right. Think about it this way. Suppose we actually were to get these bottles where you can have children gestate. This might solve the controversy over abortion. Because you would look at Roe versus Wade and say, what is this? Is this a right to kill the infant? Or is this a right, something roughly like a landlord's right of eviction, where you don't have to kill it? Now, if you don't have to kill it, then I don't know why us pro-lifers would necessarily have a problem with it. I mean, because don't we object to the killing of a life? Well, suppose it doesn't get killed. And then, suppose they said, well, suppose the pro-abortion side says, well, okay, as long as she doesn't carry it, we can live with that. You might actually find, a way of working that out. See how complicated this gets, all right? I don't know the solution. As far as I can tell, nobody knows the solution. But this is likely to happen, I think highly probable, all right? So, this is a prescient book in the sense that it identifies tendencies and issues and sees over the horizon where the problems are going to emerge. There's a saying, be careful what you ask for. Well, we ask for peace and prosperity, don't we? Well, suppose we got it. And got it forever.
One way of viewing this book is that the democratic spirit wants liberty and pleasure, and they've chosen pleasure over liberty. You can't have both, so pick one.
Okay, that's true. That they're in conflict, you can't have them both. So they'll choose pleasure. Okay, I can believe that. Particularly if there's an intensity of pain, I can particularly see why you might choose that over liberty. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when we talked about this book in Western Civ, you made the point that there's, for us, like educated, very well Westerners, this seems like a bit of a hellish dystopian existence. But for most of humanity, for most of human history, this would be immeasurably better than what their lives have been. I mean, you're living maybe 40 years, rape, death, murder. That's what's around you all the time. And so this is actually, it's a mark of our own sort of privilege, I guess, that we can even say that this is hellish.
We have the luxury of being above mere pleasure. 80 or 90% of our species does not. Look, you could have been born, all right, a street child in Nigeria, in which case the possibility of sex and drugs and clean sheets and a place to live actually might seem really attractive. And we may point out, oh, you don't get your liberty. They may not be enjoying their liberty all that much. All right. There are 10,000, child junkies or child prostitutes living in Bangkok. All right. They may say, look, give me this any day. And I don't know that they're wrong coming from that perspective. All right. But Huxley is a well-known writer and intellectual. And you read H.G. Wells's Modern Utopia. And Wells is a kind of scientific cheerleader. Every good thing is going to come from science, and if we just get more scientific. In other words, he's a leftover from the Enlightenment, essentially. Right?
What was the name of Will's book?
A Modern Utopia. It's a Modern Utopia.
Oh my gosh.
No.
What?
Sorry.
So Wells says, look, science is going to make everything great. We won't have to work so hard. We can all chill. We can all live wonderful lives. But the problem is that if you're conscious while absorbing pleasures, sooner or later you're going to wonder, what's it all for? Why do I do this? Now, granted, this is a rich man's question. All right, street child may not have the luxury of asking that. But if you get born into this, particularly if you're an alpha plus, sooner or later you're going to wonder, is this all there is? Work and sex and so on. Indeed, this sounds like the Bay Area. Right? If you're spending time in California, work and sex and so on. That's what the place is. I mean, not just the Bay Area, but it's a big portion of America. All right, we work really hard to make a lot of money so that we can not do anything except drugs and other things that stimulate us, sex or whatever. All right. Question is, sooner or later, you're going to ask, what's this for and why am I doing this? You're going to have that Kierkegaardian problem. It turns out that pleasure, if you're at it long enough, becomes boring. Remember when Kierkegaard says, boredom is the root of all evil? Well, we got to make sure that nobody gets bored. So we're going to have them play obstacle golf, which is this very expensive apparatus. Why? Well, because you have to, our economy is so productive now that we have to make sure people consume enough to keep the system going. So we have to have them fly around the world and see things that really aren't all that interesting. Apparently they have cable TV, so there's 300 channels, all of which show things like the semi-demi finals of the World Judo Championship. In other words, the kind of mindless stuff that we have on TV all the time. Right? And there's sex. And it doesn't get boring because you have sex all the time. And you're not allowed to ask the kind of question, why am I doing this? What does this amount to? Where does it all go?
I thought one of the things was really interesting because he sets up morality as like an inversion of what we typically talk about. There's a line where he says, with chastity comes passion.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that what Lucretius said? Isn't that what Epicurus said? You're only going to get yourself messed up if you get emotionally involved. A gram is better than a dam. Okay? And it doesn't matter what it's a gram of. It could be a gram of soma, it could be a gram of all kinds of white powders. All right? But there's a substantial portion of America that wants to numb themselves because they're not enjoying the consumer society and its attendant freedom. In other words, there's a wonderful essay, read it if you get the chance, called by Tolstoy. The essay is called "Why Do Men Stupefy Themselves?" In other words, in the Russian context, why do people knock back a quart of vodka? As Russians are, then and now, want to do. He asks the interesting question, why? Why does everybody want to turn into a vegetable? Why does everybody want to be less conscious? Is consciousness such a burden? And he says, yes, it is. Because if it's in a vacuum and you don't have some access to religious transcendence, consciousness turns on itself. Becomes self-destructive. Yeah.
So I'm presenting on this. I don't know when
Good.
you wanted me to talk.
Go right up. We go right there.
Okay.
Go right to work.
Cool.
Bridget.
So, this book has a lot of Shakespeare in it. I've tabbed every single reference. There are 57. I won't mention every 57. But it was great. So, a little bit of background on Huxley. I know you mentioned he really liked H.G. Wells, inspired by his work. And when he wrote Brave New World, he was already a known author by this point. He was writing, he wrote this in 4 months in 1931 when he was in France. And it was during the period of depression in the UK, which, so this is kind of inspired by that instability and the mass unemployment and the loss of gold currency standard. And so it was great because when he visited America, he was thoroughly disgusted. And so kind of put, as we were talking about, a lot of American culture into this book. But with, there's a quote in here, I don't know where it is, stability is primal and the ultimate need. which I'll talk about a little later. So anyway, the writing style itself is simply brilliant. From the get-go, he opens up and it's robotically repetitive throughout the entire book. Like, he has the characters repeating these same phrases, and not even just in their words, but in their thoughts, and the writing itself is like the same phrase, like exactly the same phrases, which is coming from the hypnopedic like teaching when they're sleeping, and it's like his writing is almost the hypnopedic teaching style. It's like
Very
it's
nice.
really great. It's so good.
Very nice.
But also one of the other things I liked about his style is the completely bizarre but oddly very specific descriptions he gives of things that they have. Like the helicopters, like they're never fully really explained what exactly they are, but like, and also the saxophones, and they're compared to like the caterwauling of cats, and you don't have any idea what he's talking about, but you know what he's talking about. He just gives such bizarre but very specific descriptions.
He's living at the end of the jazz age and came to America. So when he's talking about the saxophones, what he's talking about is the sexual license associated with jazz, and that was a real thing.
Yeah, dang. So interesting. It was just very interesting how he has such bizarre descriptions. Like the Soma holidays, like the lunar expedition. It's like, what is this? But you know what
Think
he's
of the
talking
drug
about.
culture in America. It's not at all far-fetched.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But anyway, so it's just, I was obsessed with the way he writes. Anyway, there are a lot of amazing quotes in this book. But anyway, so I'm going to get on to the actual presentation. So the main theme that I was looking at for this was the idea of freedom. In this book, it's a huge question that doesn't actually really get questioned until really when John comes in. I mean, Bernard questions it in a sort of like melancholic, Hamlet-esque sort of sense, but he never acts on it.
Right.
Also, I've categorized every character in a Shakespeare character, but it's relevant. So he thinks about it, but he doesn't. It's just in a sense of himself and what's important to him. He questions freedom, but he doesn't question it on a global societal scale to any.
Even though he's an alpha plus, and a little on the short side for an alpha plus, he doesn't have the intellectual tradition which would allow him to ask those questions.
Yeah, it was great. So it was interesting to see him try to ask, but fall short, obviously. In the
That
end.
is exactly why we read the tradition, because nobody's smart enough to do this again on their own. One of the ironies here is that this is the end of history. Think of Hegel. God help us, this is where it stops. I thought it was Mr. Trump.
Not quite.
Hegel.
Yeah. I love that project. Anyway, sorry. So it's the big thing in here. For the most part, it's liberty as a question. It's considered as freedom to do what you want.
Right.
It's a freedom question, but it's not really like everybody's happy doing whatever they want, and as long as it doesn't hurt anybody or upset society. But it's not really actually free. In the end, John has this quote. He says, what does he say? He says, "I'll teach you. I'll make you be free, whether you want to or not." Because
That's stolen from Rousseau, you know. He's in the social contract, he says that people are going to be forced to be free.
Because
That's where that comes from.
yeah, because he's recognizing that they're not actually free, and
Well, they're all free to act on the basis of their feelings at the same time, in the same way, with the same feelings.
and it's not an autonomous freedom. Is John's point? I think is they're not like free of themselves. They're just, I mean, they're indoctrinated into this idea of what is freedom. But he's got all of these things.
Freedom is the
like,
ability to gratify our desires.
yeah,
That's what the consumer society holds freedom to be.
Liberty versus license.
That's right. Liberty versus autonomy. Two different accounts of what freedom is. One is English and the other one is German.
yes, German's better. So anyway, so going on the point of indoctrination into this idea of freedom, there's this great line I was talking to Fiona the other day when we were reading it. Lenina's and Bernard are talking after they have sex, and she's saying, "Oh, I don't understand what's going on." And this line, it goes, she said with decision, determined to preserve her incomprehension intact.
Yes.
And it's just so insane that they just are determined to preserve what they know, which is natural, but it's just so unnatural in their like complete embrace of, I mean, ignorance is bliss in some sense, for at least for these people. But so it was interesting. We were talking about making people free and like the idea of what is actually free. But in this society, people are a fuel for the freedom. We see that even though everybody is happy, nobody's given a choice of whether they want to be happy. Like, that's just all it is. And they literally are fuel in like more ways than one, because there's this one part where they're flying in the helicopter and they're talking about the people are burning the bodies of people who've died, which is a great scientific feat for energy consumption. Like, it's wonderful.
Why waste anything?
Right, but it's like, for them, they're literally the fuel of the society, like, not just with their work, because this entire society is built on a regime that requires the sacrifice of those who haven't been chosen. And it's like, he talks about, in the end, Mustafa Mond, he talks about the optimum society is modeled on the iceberg, 8/9 below the waterline, 1/9 above. So he's talking about how you literally have to have subservient people in order for any society like this to flourish.
Plato.
Yeah.
It's really scary.
And it's interesting because it's built on the working classes, and it would literally topple if they rebelled. Like, if we had a revolution, the society would fall.
But again, Plato, the working classes are being given back everything they could conceivably consume. So if they were to rebel, they'd be creating a regime in which they get back less. And since they live in order to consume stuff, that would clearly be irrational, which is the way Plato's Republic is organized.
Right.
That's why he says you can't have that many alphas. You can't just build a society of alphas at the end.
Yeah. It was really interesting because
Put
they
200 of them on Crete and they start a civil war.
That was
200 different sides.
But it was interesting because he's talking, like Plato was talking about, they want to choose what's pleasure. These people, they've been crafted so they'll choose pleasure and that happiness.
How much crafting and what does that take? Since people naturally seem to be inclined towards pleasure.
Well, I mean, it goes through the entire science in the beginning, which is an enormous, careful
So they've
amount.
taken a natural human inclination and intensified it to the maximum.
Yeah, so weird.
Right? And at the same time, deprive people of the ability, in practice, to choose anything else. If it's possible to deprive people of the capacity to choose, did they ever have a capacity to choose?
But they still do, because some of the characters question it and they try to change
Like
it.
Helmholtz.
Okay, it's the smart ones that do, but that's what's going to get them sent to an island with other applicants. Right? You can't upset the apple cart.
Yeah, so it was like, where was I? Okay, so yeah, so we were talking about there's only a few smart people that understand kind of what's going on, and they're carted off to an island. But interestingly enough, we'll see Mustafa Mond later. Great character. He's chosen, but it's interesting because I'll skip to it. But anyway, so he's chosen pleasure, but he's chosen a life of servitude because
He's sacrificing himself,
Yeah.
this is the Christian tradition, for the well-being of mankind.
It's
See, he's taken from them the weight of deciding things. It's a pain being human. So he, who is a scientist and did not want to rule, has been selected out and told that he's obligated to rule. He's the philosopher king.
Wow.
And so what does he do? He reads the Bible and other banned stuff, saying, look, if I have to have pain, I'm going to enjoy it. If I'm going to have pain, I'm going to enjoy it. Work that through.
Suffer the children.
Well, not that kind of suffer, God willing. You know?
Oh yeah, just really quickly with Mustafa Mond. It's also interesting that he sort of becomes he's like a technocratic liberal, you know, but he's like the apotheosis of that. Like he is the most powerful, most.
There are 12 of them,
Right.
And they run the world, and there's no more countries, so there's no more war. Nobody fights for anything. I mean, there's the developed world, and there's the poor world. In the poor world, they have all kinds of weird syncretism between Indian religions and Christianity, and all kinds of strange stuff going on in Mexico. But they don't matter, all right? Mustafa Mond is running the first world for first worlders. And he went through the proper democratic procedure, so that at least the people who preceded him did, and he found out what people want. They want sex, they want soma. They also like not to work, but they tried that, and it just made the soma consumption go up, didn't help. But the point is, we now have a technologically sophisticated society that is so productive that there's essentially no limit on consumption, or very little in the way of limits. So we're going to need golden people like Mustafa Mond, because they got to make sure that everything runs right. And when people get a little too smart, like that guy that wrote that excellent biology book, he said, no, you're going to some island with a bunch of other smart people that aren't happy, where you can actually live like a human being. All right? And then there's society itself. They're in layers and hierarchy because of the jobs they do, but they're all essentially the same. They're consumers and pleasure absorbers. All right? This is what Epicurus told us we all want. The world has been turned into a giant pleasure garden. Little pleasures all the time. A gram is better than a dam. So we have sex and we do drugs, which is the nightlife in any major American city. I mean, I'm a New Yorker, but you can find that anywhere, right? Well, suppose we just generalize that. So we universalize that in a Kantian way. That would be perverse. So what we're doing is universalizing the maxim of absolute heteronomy. That's a messed up idea.
Yeah. So, anyways, so going off of kind of the whole drugs and sex and heteronomy idea, in the end, this idea of happiness is, he has this great quote, John, near the end. He talks about, what does he say? Oh, here. He says, it's poison to the soul as well as body. And he's not just talking about soma in that aspect, because he's talking about this view of happiness. It eventually just kind of twists on everything, and it turns back on you. And when you take happiness, or this utilitarian idea of happiness, it just kind of turns back on itself and bites you in the tail. And it becomes this like non-lethal poison, and it just takes over your entire body until there's like literally just this husk that remains that doesn't know what the alternative is, because it has just been so consumed by what is that there's no ought anymore.
It's absolute heteronomy.
Yeah. And so it's just, what even is happiness at that point? Because there's no sadness to compare with that. And if you just keep stretching further and further from anything normal, it's in some sort of like perverted attempt to remove happiness. It goes too far. And he says, John's talking to Mond at the very end, and Mond is like, well, if you want this, you're claiming sickness and sadness and pain and grief and like whatever. And John, he says, I claim it all. And it's it was such a good moment. And it's because
Kutaz is just like, you're welcome.
Yeah. And then he says, like,
again, let me speak up for our friend Mustafa, Mr. Mond. It's easy to say, I can embrace the pain, I can embrace the horror, particularly if you're a lucky American university student. But suppose you're not. You really want to embrace the horror of, say, street kids in Johannesburg?
That's the irony, is that John is a savage, and he has that life that the kids in Bangkok would have, but he still chooses that life in the end anyway, even though he's been introduced to the good life.
My guess is it's not as bad as that. In other words, he's not abused, he's not ill-treated. He actually gets a copy of Shakespeare. He's one of the lucky ones, right? Particularly because his mother comes from the civilized world. Granted, she's a pariah because her sex life is not like anybody else's there. But John is not doing so bad, and he's not in a great deal of pain. There are people that can be a great deal worse off, but what he wants is something that's not numbness. I think what Mr. Savage sees in this Brave New World is the fact that none of you people are alive or conscious. They're overstimulated to the point where they're numb. They don't feel anything. Yeah.
I think I would disagree, because I think he's even worse off than the other kids that there, because remember, they all go out into the mountain and he's the one that's by himself.
That's right. He is isolated. That's true. That's a
and
good
he does
point.
have complete aloneness, even in the worst. He's in the Savage Reservation and he's alone. It doesn't get any worse than that.
Okay, and it's that isolation that creates individuality, all right, that allows you to pull away from social influences and become your own master. So yeah, there's a strange, ironic liberation that he gets moving from Mexico to the first world. The problem is that what he's liberated into is complete control by the government of everybody's, not just their actions, but of all their emotional life. So in some ways, we go back to the journey motif. Mr. Savage is on a journey too. He's looking to find some satisfactory kind of life that gives us what's advantageous in the savage life, but also possibly offers us the benefits of the non-savage life. Problem is, he can't find a way to make it work. He can't. He's got no power.
Dare I say that that's the solution to the Tower of Babel, right? Is to break it up. It's a really ill-crafted symbol of it, but that's the Tower of Babel, right?
In what sense?
In that the heaven on earth, your first world of pleasure and all these things is the Tower of Babel, and I guess John decides that it's better to have the division of languages, or to have pain and to have disharmony than to have that.
If pleasure is not the good, I'll get you in a second. If pleasure is not the good, what's good about pain?
That you know what pleasure is.
Okay. Well, suppose I give you one pain then, and then you have something to carry around with you when you experience your pleasures. You want some more?
This is my problem with Mr. Savage, is that he sees pleasure gone amok, and then decides, well, pain is better than this.
You wouldn't be the only one. There'd be the medieval flagellants.
You know, I see the merit of what he's saying, but I think that's a false alternative. I think Plato was much more on the money when he says there are higher pleasures than the bestial pleasures.
Right.
He's seen pleasure
To
in a
borrow
different way.
from JP2's wording a little bit, he says effectively, why not think of pleasure and pain as incidental to do what's good? Sometimes you'll experience pleasure, sometimes you'll experience pain.
Okay. You think you can sell that to a democratic political regime? Get your share of pain here? Good for you. I mean, good luck running on that program is the difficulty. Yeah.
I think what John Paul was saying is right. He's not seeing the high arts like he was talking about. Like he said we got rid of the high arts. There used to be this thing called the high arts, and they got rid of that. And that's where I think the best pleasures would lie in. Whereas he's seeing just the physical pleasure, and he's saying that's too much. He's getting the two extremes. He's getting flagellants, and then the complete pleasurable society he doesn't see.
But remember, we've tested it. We know empirically we need deltas and gammas, all right? And there's no point in teaching them Plato. This does not compute. So they don't have access to those pleasures. So you want them to have sex all the time? I assume you do, or at least in this regime you would. But then how different are the alphas really? I mean, yeah, they push symbols around a little better, but they're not fundamentally anything other than me.
Here I think Plato was fundamentally wrong, although he probably couldn't have known that he was wrong, in that when Nietzsche is perversely right when he says that Christianity is Platonism for the masses. Plato never thought there could be such a thing as Platonism for everyone.
That's right.
But it is in fact possible when someone like Jesus appears on the scene to convince a staggering number of people, never everyone, never even probably the majority of people, but far more people than Plato thought possible can be convinced that virtue is the good life when you have Jesus on the scene.
But it's also going to mean that virtue is not going to be knowledge anymore.
This is true.
Yeah. You know, that's important. I think.
Yeah,
So,
it's problematic.
I mean, I would agree with you there. The argument that I'm making in the book I'm writing, so History of the World, is that there are 4 monotheisms, not 3, and that actually what we have is Judaism, which is monotheism for lawyers. It was, legalistic, and this is this elaborate set of rules, and then rules about the rules. It's amazing and complex. There's Christianity, which is monotheism for the dispossessed and the wretched of the earth, which the Romans are really good at producing. And then there's Islam, which is streamlined warrior monotheism. So you just get right to the point, which is joining the army. Well, no, I mean, the Shahada, that's the Islamic creed, and this is boiled, and this is minimalist. There is no God but Allah. Muhammad is his prophet. You are now a Muslim. Get on horseback. That's all you got to do, right? It's warrior monotheism. I think Platonism is an attempt to create a rational monotheism. I think that the form of the good is Yahweh without a personality. So he doesn't get angry or jealous or do any of that stupid stuff that Yahweh does, at least in terms of the anthropomorphic qualities. Right? In other words, the form of the good would never say, I'm jealous of something. It doesn't care. It's just sitting there gooding, doing whatever it is the form of the
Which
good does.
incidentally is why there were Jewish, Christian, and Islamic Platonists.
Of course, no doubt. All the monotheisms have to deal with this, all right? And they did so with different degrees of success. But my argument is that Platonism is an attempt to create a rational monotheism. In other words, he's a prophet as much as he is a philosopher or a poet.
Yeah, so to what extent is like the modern Western world created by philosophers, pilgrims, and exiles, and then the Brave New World is sort of like this world that he cooks up is an attempt to sort of get away from it, because most people are not philosophers, pilgrims, or exiles.
Right, and so what you do for them is you give them consumer goods. Right? That's what stabilizes advanced capitalist societies, which is why when you have an economic downturn, the regime is in trouble and in danger, because what legitimizes both the American regime, for example, and the Chinese regime, is the fact that they're creating economic growth and making people rich. They don't do that, they're not legitimate. So it's actually very dangerous.
When Trump gave his State of the Union, his first line was, "Our economy is amazing."
Okay, if we weren't running $1 trillion deficit, I would agree with you. You get to pay that back, but with interest in 20 years. We're spending that. That's what's going on there. Otherwise, it would be called theft, because we're spending your money. All right, no, welcome to America. Right? We're borrowing money that you get to pay back. You gotta like that. And we're living large on it, yeah.
I just wanted to ask if there was more you wanted to say.
I'm like halfway done.
Good. Please
Is it
go.
cool if I
Keep
keep going? Okay,
Please
sorry.
keep
So,
going.
anyways, kind of going backwards to the idea of like fun and happiness, because we were talking about like pleasure and what you get from it. But so this idea of happiness is no longer happiness, rather, but it's fun, and it's just fun, and it's because Bernard has a line in here after he sleeps with Lenina, and she's like, "Well, wasn't it fun?" And he says it was the greatest fun, and it's just that. Like, there's nothing more. Like, all fun can be is fun, and there's no meaning, there's no moral, there's no purpose anymore. It's just kind of
No, it is a purpose. It's an end in itself. It's not a means towards anything.
right. Yeah, it's just kind of it exists, and it's so.
All the
sad.
Anglo-American philosophers have been telling you this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That whole tradition is about maximizing pleasure. And pleasure is the good. And that's a very long and actually quite serious history. All right? We all say we want peace. Well, they have it. That we all say we want prosperity and plenty. They have it. The question is, what do we want peace and prosperity for? And apparently the answer is so we can have more peace and prosperity.
But anyway, so Huxley, in this idea, he's saying that through John, he's saying humans need that imperfection to make a balance. Because if we try to find perfection, as Alexander was talking about, we make ourselves into a god, and we have the Tower of Babel. And it culminates throughout the book in this question of like the balance and imperfection and whether you need it and why do you need it and how, and it culminates, it's like these final 4 chapters when they're talking to Mustafa Mond about like religion, and it seems as though these last books are almost the purpose of the book. Like it's his dies irae, maybe, like the greatest thing that he can say to us is in these last 4 chapters through the discussion between like Helmholtz and Bernard and John and Mond, and it's religion and humanity versus utilitarianism and fun. And he's arguing, so John here is arguing for like a classic humanity and morality, which I find funny that he got that from Shakespeare. And but he's talking about what's the point of living if we can't have risk, like trials and struggles, and if goodness is the only thing that you have, is it actually good and virtuous anymore? Because there's nothing that makes it so. It's only, the thing is only itself because there's something that's not like itself.
Okay. It's Plato's non-vacuous contrast. All right. You don't have something to compare to. Everything implies its opposite.
Exactly, and it's almost Aristotelian, sort of, in this, we're looking for, John's kind of trying to find, he's at one extreme and the society's at another extreme, and they're trying to find the...
I'm not convinced that the golden mean is going to work here. I don't know they can step to the middle and shake hands. Either pleasure is the point of life, or it isn't.
It seems like Huxley's saying that like there is no reconciling these two traditions, because John, he even says, he's like, I want pain, I want sin, I want all these things.
I want sin, yeah.
And he tries to convince them, like, you know, he throws this home out the window, but there's no changing the society. And as soon as the society changes him, you're not reconciling these things, you're just morphing them into each other.
Society, or at least the rich part of the world, has turned into something like a giant coral reef, where each of the human beings there has the individuality and significance of one of those little animals that lives in the reef. They're all identical, and all they do there is sift water and have the happiness characteristic of those little animals. I think this is like crustacean or mollusk, I don't know what they are, but here's the deal. One of the problems that they have here is that they're not able to formulate the possibility of having some good thing that isn't good for mollusks. In other words, there are some goods that possibly might be accessible to human beings that are inaccessible to mollusks. Also, suppose mollusks were to live to be 500 years old and to sit there absorbing seawater and doing whatever mollusk thing they do to enjoy themselves. I'm not sure that 500 years of mollusk pleasure is the equivalent or even analogous to 50 years of human pleasure. Because human beings can have pleasures like reading Shakespeare, all right, that mollusks can have. And I begin to say they're qualitatively superior. But also, unlike mollusks, human beings can also choose sometimes not to choose pleasure for some other reason. And it's when we do that that we exercise our autonomous freedom. I thought I'd let you go right to Kant there.
He talks about the categorical imperative. He mentions
I
it
know.
in the beginning.
Oh, where does he? Oh, right. The categorical imperative is now pleasure.
Or it's
What
he
page?
talks about it, page 26. Talking about he's schooling the alphas. They were alphas, of course, but even alphas have been well conditioned. Silence, silence. All of the air of the 14th floor was sibilant, the categorical imperative.
Right, silence is a categorical.
Yeah. Like perfect subjection is the categorical imperative.
Yes. Yeah.
Also, that word sibilant is really important. I mean, it's snake.
And it sounds like sibilance too. I mean, sibilance is a word that instantiates itself because it's so sibilant.
It's
It is. It corkscrews around. It's being sibilant. This is actually one of the big turning points in the novel, when we have this disjuncture that can't be reconciled. This is, in other words, what it comes to is a guardian either or. I mean, we studied that last term, right? We know that sooner or later you're not going to be able to split the difference. right? And you're going to have to say yes or no. And this is where Anglo-American philosophy goes. In other words, the entire Anglo-American tradition, from Hobbes on, if you are consistent with it, is going to create an ideal society like that. And this is a criticism of that entire tradition. In other words, Hume's sentimental ethics has political implications, and those political implications are that there. This is also a parody of Plato's Republic. Here's why. People are intrinsically unequal. We've got to acknowledge that, because otherwise you can't run society. But we're going to give everybody, all right, as much return on their labor as we possibly can. It's going to be minimally exploitive. Now, one of the ways in which we're going to be minimally exploitive is we're going to develop mind control techniques derived from advertising. That's what Huxley saw in America. He said, whoa, this is amazingly powerful. All right, mind control techniques that mean that people don't break the law anymore. So we don't need silver people to enforce it. We can get rid of that whole class. Because now we're doing it through technology. So now when we have this gold, who are actually free and know what's going on, they're the ones who are loading the dice and telling the noble lies and all that jazz. And there's everybody else who live a bovine existence, grazing like cows. And that's what their life is.
Satisfied pigs.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Would the savages be the bronze, or would that be someone
The
within
savages are
society?
completely outside. They're the ones outside of civilization altogether. Right, they're the barbarians, literally.
And the ones you steal the land from to build the city.
That's right, if you need any land, but actually we don't even need that, because since we don't have population increase, because it's completely controlled, we don't need to expand. Right? So we don't need to have wars or military, because there's nobody to fight. Yeah.
Just a quick point on that. He seems to be also talking to Keynes a little bit here.
Yes.
With the sort of like they don't grow, like they don't expand, but yet their economy is sort of, it's a perfectly calibrated economy.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's designed to maximize output, but also maximize throughput, maximize destruction. So you get single use things, and then you make more of them. And so you make sure that that production and consumption completely balance out. And because technology allows for mass production, or Ford, he's going to save us through consumption. What that means is now we can satisfy everybody's desires. Right? We can't give them the desire for anything that's not physical pleasure. We can't give them mental pleasure or emotional pleasure. That would be destabilizing and dangerous.
Sorry,
Okay.
did you want me to go on?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay, cool. So we're talking about, so John had the idea of classic humanity and morality, and then Mond returns with, he wants to create a society where you don't need anything like that. Like you just, because it's not, like it's not useful. Like in a sort of like textile sense.
Pleasures, which is what life is for you.
Yeah, and he says, he has a wonderful line. He says, in a properly organized society like ours, nobody has any opportunities for being noble or heroic. Conditions have got to be thoroughly unstable before the occasion can arise.
It's true.
And he wants to eliminate every possible variable.
Why?
Because if there are variables, then everything is unstable, and stability is the greatest good.
Okay, well, certainly we want stability. We want to abolish history. And that, of course, goes back to Plato's Republic, too. The whole tradition of Western political philosophy is an attempt to abolish history until we get to Hegel, in which case everything changes. Right? But everybody else says, look, Plato says, look, once I get the good society up and running, don't change anything. No more history for you. Right? What Plato's trying to do is satisfy everyone's desires, and so we have two classes. We have the gold and we have the bronze, and even the smart people are bronze. Right? We got a few up there, all right, who treat the people beneath them essentially like cattle. They're benevolent despots. Said, look, what makes you happy is a bovine existence, so I'm going to give you lots of grass. Right? you get all unruly if I give you books, so I'm not giving you that. Yeah.
And that's evident when Bernard Marx begs at his knees Mustafa Aman to stay in society, and he's on his knees begging him, "Don't send me away."
That's right. That's right. He's ill-equipped to go out there, right? None of these people are tough. None of these people have developed virtuous qualities which you would need in response to difficulties. All right. So these people with very soft hands are going to be given heavy labor. Hard thing for them to do. All right. Here's the deal. They're all atomized individuals. We have no families. We have no religions except the orgy-porgy religion. Right? We have no countries. We have no ideologies. We have nothing worth suffering for. In other words, I'm a parent, so I know many parents, or any parent that's any good, are willing to sacrifice and suffer for their children. You'll be surprised when parents are willing to. You'll be surprised what your parents did for you. Right? You don't appreciate it at this age, but 10 years from now you will. All right. Having children gives us something worth sacrificing for. Having a family, having a religion, having an ideology. Those things all have to be stripped away. Because if there's anything worth sacrificing for, then pleasure isn't the good. In which case, this is a dystopia.
They even make it so that life isn't something worth sacrificing for.
There we go, right. Everybody's gotten conditioned to having the best toys when they were kids in the hospital for dying people. So nobody's scared of it. Nobody even thinks about it. So you don't have any worries about your own mortality. Everybody gets sick like clockwork at about 60 because you're too old. And then they just load you with soma and you die and nobody worries about it. No anxiety. This is the result of Hume's sentimental ethics. He says, what's good is what's useful and agreeable to ourselves and others. Brave New World provides everybody with useful, agreeable stuff, except Mr. Savage. Because he doesn't find being agreeable. He finds things that are disagreeable agreeable because he hasn't been trained properly. Yeah.
I think this is crazy. I just thought of this, that the salvation of all of these humans is in the hands of Mustafa Aman, because they are not ever intentionally choosing the right or the wrong. They're essentially like cattle just acting. So if you look at the question of salvation, would they be saved? Well, they're never really intentionally choosing anything. They're just acting. So
it's like asking if coral reefs are saved.
Right. So it's all in the hands of Mond, essentially.
Well,
maybe.
How about this? Mustafa Mond is sacrificing his own happiness for the happiness of the human race. See, he didn't want to be, like, because this is from Plato, he didn't want to become a world controller. He was a very good scientist that got nominated, and then you more or less get dragooned into it. He didn't want to do that. Again, this is from Plato. The rulers, the good ones, don't want to rule. They want to keep on doing science on some island. But they got to sacrifice himself for the good of humanity. In other words, he's a Christian figure. He's a Jesus figure.
Yeah, let the children suffer.
That's right.
Or suffer the children to come to me.
Well, that means allow. Don't, yeah.
I mean, it just means allow the children.
That's right, that's right. So everyone else is only partially human in a limited sense. Human in the sense that they consume human pleasures. But no one makes human decisions. No one is really living a human life. This is a less than human life. What it means is that the Anglo-American tradition is deeply mistaken about human nature and the nature of human happiness. It's not that pleasure is a bad thing intrinsically. It's that it's not the only good thing. And yet, to explain exactly what painful things are good for people and how, I want to start with, say, two things. What good is having a toothache? I mean, Mustafa Aman say, what's good about it? You feel redeemed now? Mm-hmm. Right, well, we think we should get rid of toothaches. What do you think? And of course, then he's going to say, well, let me, in the place of two things, let me put every possible pain, and then just let me know which ones you like and why, because that's really perverse. Can you universalize the maxim that you say, like getting your toes stepped on? No. So, I mean, again, let me speak up on behalf of this Anglo-American tradition. When you get specific, you may want to say, well, pleasure isn't the good. I agree with you. And pain isn't intrinsically evil. I agree with you there. But it doesn't make me think that pleasure is intrinsically bad and I should shun it. Nor does it mean that I should look around and find out how much pain I can get. But this still leaves me uncertain. Which of these pains are the ones that are good for me? Maybe, for example, I don't know, the death of one of my children would make me really deep. I don't care. I don't want anything to happen to my child. Right, yeah, maybe I get all kinds of deep insights for that. Maybe it would be, in some sense, good for me. I don't care. I'm not, who's being rational here now? I mean, things have gotten very muddy. So you say that the pursuit of pleasure is not good enough? Fine. What is good enough? Respect for pure moral law.
Exactly.
Go ahead, yeah,
Right? That's all we need. So I'm going to talk a little bit about stability and then I'll finish.
Okay.
But anyway, so stability, he talks about good, happiness as the highest good is what's preached. He has a line in here where he talks about stability as the primal good, like it's necessary. So it feels like as though they may preach that happiness is the greatest good, stability for them is intrinsically necessary.
It may be a precondition to happiness. Nobody enjoys revolution.
Yeah, yes. And he talks about individuals being unstable and able to undermine the society, so they get rid of the individual. Like the individual does not exist anymore. And it's great. There's one of the hypnopaetic mantras that they repeat all the time is, if one person feels, the community reels. So it's just great to see like the individualistic idea of humanity as bad and not desirable because of what it can do to a society. And while it's like practical precedent would require stability to be the most important thing. And every single mantra that I can remember is geared towards the keeping of stability in the society and the people. Like ending is better than mending. Because to mend something would be to create an empathy with it. Because it's important to you. Like not necessarily just clothing, but mending something that's broken, like a relationship, or like your cat is sick. You should get rid of everything and get something new because new is better. But it's like if you
also there's a need to sustain consumption. You have to keep up with the productive process.
Yeah. And then like we were saying earlier, a gram is better than a dam, and like everyone belongs to everyone else. Like they're all totally centered on keeping that like euphoric sense of happiness in the world, which keeps everybody in line and subservient, which is how the society runs. Because
But they're keeping them in line and subservient for their own good.
Exactly. But they don't know any better. Like
When they know any better, they revolt, and then nobody's able to absorb pleasure.
They voluntarily chose to return.
Okay, you want to voluntarily choose less pleasure.
No, they voluntarily chose the people who did the alphas who did the alphas.
Yeah, so it was interesting to see that Mond chose less pleasure then, as somebody who understands what's going on, because they don't seem to care that it's propaganda, because they talk a lot about it. It's like, oh yeah, propaganda, whatever. Like, but they don't. It's not a bad thing.
Is he choosing less pleasure though? Is Mon choosing less? He's an alpha who gets to have whatever girl he wants and do whatever he
Yeah,
wants.
but he wanted the pleasures of the intellectual life and being around interesting people to have conversations.
Yeah. He says near the end,
Yeah.
he says, I almost envy you.
Well,
And then they're like, well, come with us. And he's like, no, I've chosen this life. So it's really interesting. I mean, for him, it's less pleasure for himself, but more pleasure, like the greater good.
It's the Kierkegaardian either or.
Yeah. Oh, that's
The
interesting.
aesthetic man or the ethical man. Or the mollusk or the human being.
He has an interesting line about individuality and independence and everything, and he says somewhere, independence was not made for man, that it is an unnatural state, will do for a while, but will not carry us on safely to the end. So in a sense, he's saying that in order to have a lasting society, you need a hive mind. Which I guess there is an argument to be made for that, seeing as how every great
Hegel's
civilization
already
has
made it.
failed. Yeah, exactly. So it's just get this other page. Yes, I did. Okay, so to finish, he's talking about this entire book is amazing. But anyway, so it's this inevitable end, I think, is eventually self-destruction, because there's no way to have perfection, because there's always going to be outliers, and if you send enough of them to an island, they're gonna start thinking more and more and maybe revolt. And through perfection, through this pursuit of perfection, you are always going to fail. Humans can never be perfect. Even like something science created, they hold them up as like alpha double pluses are like the greatest thing that science can create, but they revolt still. Like they have their own ideas, which have made them dangerous. And when they're talking about the society created by alphas, they're talking about how like the great power comes great responsibility or whatever, which is why alphas need to be like so carefully monitored. But through the pursuit of perfection, I think they're going to fail because of like the Tower of Babel. And I think it ends perfectly with John's suicide. I think it's a wonderful finish to the book. It's like the last act of autonomy almost.
it's two extremes.
He's joining the dead because he regards all the people around him as dead. They're all numb. They don't have any real internal life. They don't love, they don't hate. They have weak and very limited emotions. Their conception of human life is consuming and consuming and consuming. And let's face it, this is the utopia of the Anglo-American tradition. What stabilizes advanced capitalist societies is the cult of consumption. Right? We give you new things every year. You know, they could be microwave ovens or iPhone 11s or whatever. And you'll actually get taught, look, the 16th of an inch bezel, it's been taken away. This is going to be life-changing. No, it's not. It's just a blasted phone. It's not life-changing. It's a phone. No, I better get my $1,200 out. I mean, that bezel is bothering me. Think of the things we spend our time thinking about. All right? And, as T.S. Eliot says, that 4 quartets distracted from distraction by distraction. It's a great line. So this is a world organized around distracting from people, people from any significant inquiry into the human condition.
Yeah, and it seems as though they've been driven to this, or he literally says they've been driven to this through the removal of art.
Art gets people excited.
Yeah, and it's like art is necessary for the human condition, so they've got to remove it. Because the human condition is unstable and like there's sadness there, so we don't want it. So he says so Mon is talking to John at the end, and he says that's the price we have to pay for stability. You've got to choose between happiness and what people used to call high art. We've sacrificed the high art, and we have the feelies and the scent organ instead.
The feelies are a great development in pornography. We have the internet,
Yeah.
right? And no, there's a tremendous demand for viewing people having sex. And if you put your hands in, actually feel it. Well, I mean, if they could figure out how to do that with virtual reality, you know, they would have already. And they're no doubt working on it now.
It's just about happened.
Right, yeah, well, no doubt. I
In
mean,
China. And
you know, this, who knows what VR is going to look like, but yeah, we may actually get the feelies, right? Or, I mean, you know, how weird does it get? You know, pornography with no people in it, right? With just computer-generated images. Well,
Yeah.
okay, I'm sure that that's going to exact a toll. You know, I just don't know from whom or what time.
Yeah.
it's progress for progress' sake. There's no thinking about it.
Well, the problem is, who do we want to put in charge of deciding what progress happens? See, philosopher kings are in short supply. So who do we get instead?
Scientist.
Scientists, and that's been tried already. That's what Comte, C-O-M-T-E, wanted to do. Is there any reason to believe that understanding physics endows people with superior powers of moral discernment? I can't think of any. I mean, this is the last gasp of Platonism. Probably scientists will know how to run things right. No. The scientists I know are really introverted and kind of talk to each other and kind of squirrely. I wouldn't put them in charge of anything. No, if you have an IQ of 150, you don't belong in politics. You belong in the lab. It's true. What you want for politicians is about 115, 120. You don't want them stupid, but you don't want them too smart. If you get them too smart, they start giving orders to everybody because they're the smartest guy in the room. You can't have that. That's what happened with somebody like Woodrow Wilson or John Adams. They really were smart. And the problem is they couldn't delegate anything. They were terrible presidents. You know, give me a guy says, you take care of that, you take care of that, you take care of that, report back
Is
to
that
me
what
tomorrow.
Trump does now? I mean,
Oh, don't get me started. Because I can't vote for the Democrat or the Republican. I don't know where this is going to lead. This should not have happened.
So back to what you were saying about the abolition of art. Nietzsche starts looking like a nice alternative.
Right? We love this.
Yeah, and doesn't it make you want to
Good
start
old
philosophizing
days.
with a hammer? Like, bang, this is gonna go.
Yeah.
Art
The
is
thing is
dead.
that John
No, it's not.
closer to
Paul has
Nietzsche
killed it.
than he is to almost anyone else because he doesn't really care that much about God. He's a lot more like and daedalus. He wants art for art's sake.
Right, because that's going to lend some meaning to his life. Right, yeah.
There's this. Okay, so I promise this is the end. But so the thing with Mond that's killing me is that he knows what's going on,
Yeah.
and he recognizes that there is something better about the human condition because he has a line in here that I don't think I bookmarked. It's in
think
the
I have it.
thing. Well, he's talking about the where he says there is something better. I can't remember where it is. He's saying.
I'll find it for you.
Thank you. So he's talking about in this passage I'm finding, he might find it. He says, actual happiness always looks pretty squalid in comparison with the overcompensations for misery. And of course, stability isn't nearly so spectacular as instability. And being contented has nothing of the glamour of a good fight against a misfortune, none of the picturesqueness of a struggle with temptation or a fatal overthrow by passion or doubt. Happiness is never grand. And but he's talking earlier on in this section, I think. He's saying that there is something necessary about, it's when he's talking about the biological study, and he says that there is something necessary to, like, telos and truth and stuff, and he's saying,
We can't let them talk about
here it is. The purpose of life was not the maintenance of well-being. The purpose of life was not the maintenance of well-being, but some intensification and refining, page 177. Intensification and refining of consciousness, some enlargement of knowledge, which was, the controller reflected, quite possibly true. And it's
yeah.
just
that killed me.
yeah, so
Yeah.
he knows, and the fact is there are other people that know, and yet it's just, for the greater good, they've destroyed
This is
the
a
good.
perverted Christian impulse. He's sacrificing his own good and the good that might be achieved by a few for the greater good.
Yeah.
You know, because most people can't get access to that greater good.
But like in this like pursuit of the greater good, they've almost destroyed what is actually good. until it's like devolved into this like.
What is actually good?
Well, they're talking about in John's conception of like humanity, it's in like what's necessary for the human condition, like an enlargement of knowledge, like Mon was talking about, or just simply being able to feel things. But they've boiled it down to something very chemical and very simplistic and very easy to control, which is the whole point.
This is the end of the line of materialism and reductive naturalism. This is the conception of human nature that's built into it, and every conception of human nature is a disguised theory of education, also a disguised theory of ethics, which always entails a disguised theory of politics. So the point then is this: the Anglo-American tradition rests its case. In the middle of the 20th century, somebody says, this is where we're going. You want this? Some people do, and some people would, and under the certain circumstances, I can understand why they might. All right. This is Hobbes's conception of a good world.
Yeah.
Right. He's not asking so much; he doesn't want his head cut off. You know, if he gets to go to the Feelies and drink and have soma, that's great. But you know, he just wants security, stability. He says, "I've lived through exciting political times. I'd rather not." And he's right about that. So, if there's something wrong with this, then there's something wrong with the entire Anglo-American tradition, with that tradition of reductive naturalism and materialism. But here's the deal: if you want to get beyond or outside that reductive naturalism, all right, you're going to have to explain how and why. All right. In other words, if you want to go beyond reason, right, which is what a Christian has to do, right, there's a real danger that you'll end up going beneath reason. You try and be more than reasonable, you may well end up less. So if this is wrong, fair enough. What's right? A world with more pain? Apparently so. Well, what sort of pain and distributed how? You prefer instability? Well, you know that instability is going to get out of hand, which means that your own regime will collapse. So ask yourself if you really wanted stability. Because you only want that if you're incapable of creating a good regime. You know?
There was one really interesting point. I did not expect this when the Mustafa Imam was talking about the works that they've gotten rid of, like the Bible and and all that stuff, and he mentions the imitation of Christ. And I was like, wow, how he is probably seeing that as that's the extreme on that end. We want to go as far away from that as possible.
That's right.
And I thought that was surprising that he put that in there.
And Mustafa Imam is a connoisseur of all these books. He says, look, I'm sacrificing myself, but it has its compensations. I get to live like a human being. Granted, it's painful because I know the reality of what's happening. I know my own death is impending. I haven't been hypnotized the way everybody else has. But he's a philosopher king. He's ruling because he was chosen, not because he wants to. He's sacrificing his own happiness for the happiness of everybody else. It's a perverse kind of Christianity.
It's interesting, in that same passage, John, he's talking about God doesn't change, and Mon replies, men do. And it's just...
If this is wrong, what do we have to add to make it right? Think carefully about that. I mean, none of you seem satisfied with this. Fair enough. You know, what you want.
I just wanted to say, I think I would add Huxley along with Dostoevsky and Nietzsche as one of the great psychologist authors, because he's so insightful about humanity and the way he asks these questions. That's
Yeah. In other words, suppose we got, well, you know, there's a saying, be careful what you wish for. We said, I'm going to look at the Anglo-American tradition, check out what Mill, for example, has been wishing for. What's that going to look like? And he said, well, it's going to involve sex and drugs and rock and roll. Right, essentially, you know, Dionysus, but controlled Dionysus. So you get the right amount every day. Dionysus. So it's in some ways industrial strength Dionysus. No, have you ever been up to Orlando to the theme parks? I find them awful. I mean, the only one that I like is SeaWorld, but when you go to well, no, at least it has living things. But you go to Disney World, and it's literally industrial fun. I mean, this vast number of people are taking it one time. Mass-produced fun actually turns out not to be all that interesting. It gets old real quickly, unless you're 3. Kids go nuts. Yeah, for adults, if you find it fun, then there's a problem.
Anecdotally, I knew this kid from my high school who was obsessed with Disney. You know, they'd go 3 times a summer or something like that, and it was the strangest thing to see someone just so invested in that. Like that for them became their family, their community, and it reminds me the World State's motto is community, identity, stability. That's what replaces family God or family church and what is it? Family, country, religion.
That's
and so
right.
it's a really interesting. The state becomes your community instead of
Yeah,
family.
this is the world turned into Disneyland.
Oof.
And of course, you can't have art there. Imagine Oedipus in Disneyland.
No.
Like, he just doesn't belong there. You know, he's standing on the ride with no eyes. Right. Trying to get to, well, no, Oedipus in
Trying to
Disneyland.
colonize.
There's a problem there. Right, he doesn't belong there. There's something really wrong with this. In other words, Disneyland is a dystopia. It's all too real,
Yeah, and I worry about the fact that Disney controls something like 40% of all the movies and TV shows that are made today, and that's the stuff that makes all the money now. Isn't it? I wouldn't say any of that stuff is great art.
Probably true.
What's the
Bridget,
Yes.
you said that you classified all the characters by Shakespeare characters. Would you mind sharing?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I mean mostly just the main characters.
Yeah.
So Mond was really weird, but so they don't obviously fit perfectly. Like human beings aren't the
So
same.
who would you choose for mom?
Prospero.
That's right, exactly right.
Yeah.
That's just what I was thinking, exactly right.
Cool. Check one. So, and I was thinking Bernard is he's almost a Hamlet, but he's not. He doesn't have the knowledge of a Hamlet. He just has the melancholy,
He thinks too much.
which is weird in opposition to Hamlet, who thinks already too much. So I mean, Bernard just thinks way too much, and it's interesting because he thinks totally in a intellect in an inner sense. I mean, Hamlet does as well, but it's just interesting to see where it leads them. Whereas Hamlet, he kind of goes crazy and kills his friend, but Bernard ends up begging at the feet of Mond to stay, which is an interesting parallel to see the lack of knowledge where you end up versus where Hamlet is. I mean, he's gone to school. Yeah, that's my theory on Bernard. Lenina is Miranda. I mean, granted, most of the society would be a Miranda-esque, like they don't know what's going on with the outside world, and they're like, "What is this?" That quote, I actually counted the different quotes. I have every single quote in here. Tempest wins with 9 quotes.
That's
Hamlet,
intense. Good
yeah,
for you.
Hamlet has 8, and then Othello has 5, and then there's a bunch of other ones. And
who's Mr. Savage?
So we're talking about this journey motif, right? But he's Caliban-esque when we first meet him, because when we first meet him, and he's talking about and he almost, okay. He's like, where did I write it? He's like Ferdinand and, it's after this. He has moments where Edgar from
Yes.
Lear. Yeah, but he almost has, he starts out as like the savage character, but he's like more like an Edgar, but then towards the end, he becomes more Caliban-like.
Now God stand up for bastards.
Yeah, or that's Edmund.
I know.
Yeah, And they quote Edmund in the end because they're talking about the wheel has come full circle and I am here, and they're talking about
He's the bad brother.
the bastard who's only concerned with pleasure.
Yeah, taking the position of his brother Edgar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're
both
talking
sons
about
of Gloucester.
right, and they talk about Gloucester, and well, they mention Lear a few times, obviously. So he's Edgar, but he has not a reversion, but he becomes very Caliban towards the end as he slowly, like, once the death of his mother,
Yeah.
it just kind of breaks him,
Right.
and he
'Cause
just
he has
goes.
no human connection anymore.
Exactly.
Did you have one for Helmholtz?
Helmholtz. I love Helmholtz. He's like Horatio. He's kind of a solid, like, he has a head on his shoulders, and it's great to see the dynamic between Helmholtz and Bernard, because there's a part in here that I don't think I tabbed, where they're talking and Bernard is like crowing about his triumph with the controller, and he's like sending them off to an island, and Helmholtz is ashamed of Bernard and his passion, and he's like, why? I mean, he doesn't say anything, he just sits there and thinks. So he's a Horatio to Bernard's Hamlet, and in the end it I guess he saves him.
There are more things on heaven and earth.
Horatio than I dreamt of. That line is quoted like 3 times.
Yes, I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right, here's the deal. Come back, ready to talk about, first of all, this as a guide to contemporary politics, or politics of pleasure, right, which have been radicalized at this point. It's the only good thing that some elements of our society don't understand. Libido is everything, becomes kind of sacred. And also, if this is a defective society, what do we need to remedy the defects? How about a good war? Famine, or some kind of pestilence. You can speak up on behalf of war and famine and pestilence if you want. And then if you don't want, then I want to know what exactly is wrong with this, since they don't have those things. All right. Is there an upside to pain? Pointless, gratuitous pain? Yours or other people's? Usually other people's, not so much mine. Something worth thinking about there. It's one thing to tell me it's wrong. What I'd like you to do is tell me what's right. See you Thursday.
A quick question. Fiona and I, I can ask next class. It's
Okay.
about, Fiona and I were going to London, to separate matter, but I
Wow,
was wondering
good
if
for you,
there's
man.
any spring break.
Great, that's wonderful. That's a big part of education.
Yeah.
That's so good. I'm so happy to hear that. People don't travel enough. That's very, very good.
I was wondering if there's anything physical, Huxley.
Not that I
anything.
can think of,
Okay.
but you do want to go to the National Portrait Gallery on the top floor. You'll see that portrait of Hobbes, which is so famous. Just the face and the hand. Everything else is dark. It's an amazing portrait. It's one of the best.
What was it, the National Portrait?
National Portrait Gallery. Top floor.
Did B.F. Skinner ever read this?
Oh, sure it did. But it's that same sort of reductive scientism leads you to abolish depth psychology.
You gotta
and
travel
behaviorism.
with
If you're going to be
You gotta
strictly
travel with
scientific,
the
you
Go to
abolish the
Holland.
mind. All there is behavior.
Go to Holland.
National Portrait.
See you on Thursday. You did a great job, Bridget. Thank you. You did really well. One or two, you, and everyone wants to